night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Welcome to the world of the unusual, the bizarre, and occasionally the macabre. This is Beyond Reality Radio. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the program tonight. Bruce Markusen filling in for our regular host, I should say, Jason Hawes and JV Johnson, both taking the night off. I'll be your guest host for the next couple of hours tonight. Also fill in on Monday night's program, and then Jason and JV will return on Tuesday night. Very glad that you could join us this evening, a late night Thursday. Before we get things started, tell you about tonight's guest, the focus of the show. Want to remind you about a few things. First of all, let's remind you about our terrific website. It is beyondrealityradio.com. Again, that's beyondrealityradio.com. Also, we have a chat room. That is now at our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, JV Johnson, and there's a chat room right there. Again, JV Johnson on YouTube. So definitely take part in our chat. You can follow us on Facebook at Beyond Reality Radio. In addition, you can follow us on Snapchat and on Instagram. And if you'd like to know more about me, you can follow me on Facebook. I have a page that I started about 5 months ago. It is called Bruce Markusen's Ghostly Gallery. Actually, if you just plug in the words Ghostly Gallery on Facebook, it's going to be one of the first things that comes up. There I talk about horror, supernatural, the paranormal, talk about appearances on this show, lots of other fun stuff at Bruce Markusen's Ghostly Gallery. Please visit the page. Please like it. We're fast approaching 500 likes, so we're nearing a milestone, hoping to get there in the next day or two, and building the audience there as well. Now, coming up on tonight's program, our guest is going to be Dr. Paul Leslie. Paul Leslie is a psychotherapist, author, and educator, and he's going to be talking about hoodoo doctors and shamanism. He has a website, drpaulleslie.com. We'll tell you more about that during the course of the show. He's also written a couple of books. One of them, his newest book, is Country Shamanism, an exploration of the magical and healing practices of the coastal Carolinas and Georgia. Prior to that, wrote The Year of Living Magically, Practical Ways to Create a Life of Spirit, Wonder, and Connection. So he'll be our guest coming up. We will take your calls for Dr. Paul Leslie at our toll-free listener line. That is 844-687-7669. Write it down if you need to. 844-687-7669. Also, looking ahead toward the Monday show, I'll be guest hosting that night as well, and the guest that we'll have is Carlin Betcha. She is an artist and illustrator. She's going to talk about monsters, zombies, famous body parts like Vincent van Gogh's ear, and other creepy things. Sounds like a fun show coming up on Monday. Carlin Betcha, artist and illustrator, talking about zombies, monsters, famous body parts. And then on Tuesday, I'll be back to my normal routine, listening at home. Jason and JV will be back on Tuesday with Cindy Brannon. Cindy is a witch and a spiritual teacher. She will be discussing the subject of Hecatian witchcraft, and that'll be coming up on the Tuesday night program. One thing that's hard to believe, we actually are in mid-May now. June is just around the corner. And June always means a very fun event, one that I look forward to, Scaricon New England. That is going to be coming up June 7th through the 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts. And if you've never been to this event, it's something that you need to do. Hopefully you can do it this year. There's still enough time to prepare. A lot of great horror and sci-fi related guests. Among the celebrities scheduled to appear are the great Cassandra Peterson, a.k.a. Elvira, one of the great horror hosts of all time. Cassandra Peterson is going to be making a repeat visit. She was actually at Scaricon New England last year. Other guests include Heather Langenkamp. Heather Langenkamp appeared in several of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. So she'll be a featured guest. And then as we look at more recent or more contemporary horror, David Howard Thornton, the man who plays that evil clown in the Terrifier movie, he will be at Scaricon, New England as well. And Billy Zane, longtime actor whose career dates back to the 1980s. He appeared in a 1989 kind of a thriller/horror film, Dead Calm, with Sam Neill and Nicole Kidman. Very good film. Hard to believe it celebrates its 30th anniversary. He also appeared in the Demon Knight movie, so Billy Zane will be there. And as if that's not enough, there's going to be a 40th reunion for the surviving crew of the Phantasm film. The original film came out 40 years ago, back in 1979, made on an absolute thread of a shoestring of a budget. And it has become a cult classic. It has become one of those films that you just have to see. If you're a horror fan, if you're someone that proclaims yourself as a true fan of the genre of horror, Phantasm is one of those movies. It spawned several sequels. And many of the surviving cast members are going to be at the reunion for Phantasm coming up, Scaricon, New England. It's just a few weeks away. Hard to believe. June 7th through the 9th. It's a Friday through a Sunday. And it's taking place in Framingham, Massachusetts. You can visit the website as well, scaricon.com. You can also visit Scaricon on Facebook. So a really fun event. One of the nice things about the Scaricon show is that, to me, it's just the right size for a horror sci-fi convention. There's a lot of access to the actors, the celebrities. There's really an opportunity to talk to them, get an autograph, get a picture taken, but also talk to them a little bit. Lots of great panels where you get a chance to hear the actors talk about their experiences in film, making these various horror movies that they've done over the years. Some horror conventions have become so overblown. They're just so big. And a lot of them sort of delve into non-horror and non-sci-fi areas. And the nice thing about Scaricon, one of the many nice things about it, it doesn't branch out into those other areas. It stays true to the genres of horror and sci-fi. And it's just the right size where you can really, as a convention, you can really have access to the various celebrities. So I highly recommend it. Coming up June 7th through 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts, Scaricon, New England, 2019, just a few weeks away. And just a few minutes away, our guest is coming up for tonight's edition of Beyond Reality Radio. We will be talking to Dr. Paul Leslie, psychotherapist, author, and educator. He'll discuss the historical origins and practices of hoodoo as practiced on the coast areas of South Carolina and Georgia, areas known as the Low Country. So the subject of hoodoo, we'll broach that with the author, Dr. Paul Leslie, coming up.
Scaricon, New England, the fan convention for all things pop culture, horror, and paranormal is almost here. June 7th through the 9th at the Sheridan Hotel and Conference Center, Framingham, Massachusetts. Scaricon brings an amazing group of celebrities, including Cassandra Peterson. You know her as Elvira, Mistress of the Dark.
Elvira.
Heather Langenkamp, Amanda Wiss, and Lisa Wilcox from the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Plus, a 40th anniversary cast reunion and screening of the cult classic Phantasm. And many more. Scaricon also features panel discussions, film screenings, great vendors, and parties. It's a weekend of fun from start to finish. For more information, visit Scaricon.com or check us out on Facebook. Use the promo code BRR at checkout to save 25% on your admission. That's Scaricon.com. Scaricon.com. Scaricon, New England is being held June 7th through the 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts. Visit the website today. Use promo code BRR with your ticket purchase to save 25% on admission.
My name is Bruce Markusen. I'm the guest host for tonight's program. I'll be with you the next couple of hours, and we'll be talking to Dr. Paul Leslie. He is our guest this evening. He is a psychotherapist, a researcher, trainer, and an author living in Aiken, South Carolina. He's a licensed therapist, national board certified fellow in hypnotherapy, has a doctorate in counseling psychology. He has authored several books, And his research and practice focus is in the area of psychotherapy, healing, shamanism, and personal development. Joining us on Beyond Reality Radio, Dr. Paul Leslie. Paul, welcome to the program. How are you tonight?
I'm great, Bruce. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Earlier tonight, I looked up hoodoo on the internet, doing some research for the program, and the basic definition, I guess, is that it's traditional African American folk spirituality. Pick it up from there, if you will, Paul. Give us a little bit of a sense of what exactly hoodoo is and how it's different from voodoo, because I sense there's some confusion between those two.
Yeah, there generally is. And a lot of times people use the two terms interchangeably. The big distinction is hoodoo, at least from my perspective, what I've researched, came across from West Central Africa with the slave trade. And when it was brought into the southeastern Atlantic coast of the North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia area, they were brought into plantations that were primarily of the religious nature of Protestantism. And when the African people were brought over, they brought a lot of their traditional religious, spiritual beliefs with them. So when they came into these Protestant communities that they were forced into, a lot of their religious aspects of that belief system they had to either go underground, change, essentially for survival, because a lot of times these folks were forcibly, converted into, Protestant Christianity. Now, in the case of voodoo with a V, a lot of that came from the Caribbean, Haiti, and areas like that, which were primarily run by the French, and the French were generally Catholic. So when they brought their slaves into the Louisiana area, they were bringing the slaves in from a Catholic perspective. Well, a lot of the African beliefs could meld a little better into Catholicism because they had a variety of different spirits and things like that that could blend in with the different saints that you see in Catholicism. In voodoo, they familiar spirits like Papa Legba and things like that could be kind of imposed upon certain features of a Catholic saint, whereas voodoo just mostly became the religion, some elements of spirituality, but there aren't saints in Protestant, Southern Baptist religious system. So it really kind of evolved. Hoodoo kind of just primarily became a working and pragmatic magical system.
So it was a system that originated in Africa, was brought over by the slaves. They're coming to America, and they did not feel comfortable or feel safe in practicing this religion in any kind of open way?
That's pretty much it. As a matter of fact, there's widespread knowledge now, from all the anthropology and archaeology that a lot of this continued during their enslavement, but it was not something that was actively showcased because, not to look too favorably upon the powers that be, that they were, having their own religion. They're, trying to empower themselves through magic to deal with really what was a horrendous situation to survive.
Sure.
And a lot of the aspects of hoodoo, too, involve healing. So a lot of times slaves didn't always get the best medical treatment. It was only when it was a life-threatening issue, and slaves were considered property back then. So slave owners and overseers would only call the doctor if it looked like the property was going to stop producing. So a lot of the basic healing day-to-day, trials and tribulations, they kind of had to take care of themselves, and that comes a lot of herbal stuff, magical spells for help. All those were still actively going on.
At what point did the slaves or African Americans in general here in the United States start to feel comfortable in practicing hoodoo out in the open? Did that take a long time for that openness to develop?
Well, I'm going to be blunt with you, Bruce. I still don't think it's there.
Really?
Yeah, the one thing I've noticed in my research, because I went around and tried to talk to a lot of people, and I was fortunate that I was able to talk to a good number of people, but there are more people who practice hoodoo who still do it very secretly. It's interesting, the other day I was actually talking to a contact of mine who lives on the coast of South Carolina, and he's a hoodoo practitioner, an artist, and we were making the conversation about trying to get people to talk about these things. And he agreed with me that he said, you'll talk to someone who will totally dismiss you in a nice way and say, I won't know anything about that. And then you find out they have in the back of their house a little altar with all the hoodoo magical stuff that people come over late at night and, seeking assistance with spiritual problems. But it's just something overall that's still kind of looked down on. And that's, I think that's very unfortunate because it's got a lot to offer from a historical perspective, anthropological perspective, and there are some positive aspects to that system.
So the stigma remains all these hundreds of years later.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I have found more Caucasians who claim to do hoodoo than I have a lot of African Americans who've done it. The ones that I know personally who do, and I've worked with, interviewed, that they're fairly open, and they've all commented that it's something that they would like to see more people of their ethnic persuasion to be more open about or to be more interested.
Our guest is Dr. Paul Leslie. We are just getting started on the subject of hoodoo. We'll be talking about shamanism and really getting into some depth on this topic over the next hour and a half. We'll also be taking your calls next hour if you want to jot down our toll-free line. It's 844-687-7669. Again, that's 844-687-7669. Much more on the subject of hoodoo and shamanism coming up tonight with our guest, Dr. Paul Leslie. You're listening to Beyond Reality Radio.
Did you know that online retailers like Amazon have constant deals that can save you money on the things you buy every day? It's no joke. Save 40%, 50%, even 80% on great products, and all you have to do is know about them. Noodle Shark is the way to be alerted when something good is coming your way. Noodle Shark is the social media page that lists great deals that not only save you money, but give you the deals before anyone else has them. All you have to do is find Noodle Shark on Facebook. Search it as The Noodle Shark. That's The Noodle Shark, because you deserve to save too. Become a shark and save.
Our guest is Dr. Paul Leslie. He is a psychotherapist, a researcher, author, and educator. We're talking about the subjects of hoodoo and shamanism. Paul, I'm curious how you got interested in this topic. You're obviously very accomplished, several degrees. You have a doctorate. You've authored books. You have some pretty good jobs. And I don't mean to patronize you. You obviously have a very impressive resume. So how exactly did the interest in something like hoodoo come about?
Well, it's an interesting turn of events. I had moved to South Carolina, where I now live, back in 2008, and I had moved up from Tampa, Florida. I took a job at a local college where I still teach, and I was in I really didn't know much about South Carolina, but I was in a supervision group of therapists, and one day someone was talking about a client of theirs that they were having trouble with, who was stating that they had someone who, quote, put a root on them, and they were very anxious and worried. And so I've never heard this, and I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, it's hoodoo. It's kind of like put a hex or put a curse on you. And so...
And the word is root, R-O-O-T?
Yeah, it's R-O-O-T, root.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, the hoodoo doctors in the area that I'm in, which we call the Low Country, which is the coastal Carolinas and Georgia, are known more often as root doctors rather than hoodoo doctors. And a lot of that you can trace back to the use of medicinal herbs and roots for healing as well as magic. So I heard this root business, and it kind of intrigued me, and I started, looking into things and reading things, wanted to know more about it, and started running into some interesting individuals, and I thought, to be quite blunt with you, Bruce, at the time I thought it was a bit silly. And one day I had a colleague, a professor friend of mine, who I had mentioned that I'd heard about this stuff, and I was really interested. But then I said, maybe it's kind of a bunch of mumbo-jumbo. And I remember he was kind of an old Southern gentleman, and he sat right up in his seat, and he looked at me, and he was very serious, and he said, Paul, you better be careful with that stuff. There's a lot of people around here that really believe in that, and it's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Well, he kind of got me like, what is going on here? He's a fairly rational guy, and that just opened the door for me to start investigating, and I have a love of history. My undergraduate degree's in history, so I just started studying up on it, and was fortunate to start interviewing practitioners and other researchers in it, and it just kind of opened a whole new world for me.
And when did this start, this interest?
It's probably about 2008.
So more than 10 years now.
Yeah. Wow. Jeez, yeah. Now I'm feeling old. Thanks, Bruce. Yeah.
It's funny, though. You become interested in something, you become passionate about it, and the time does move by very quickly. Paul, what are some of the specific ways in which hoodoo is practiced, in which the way this spirituality is applied? Let's get into some of those specifics.
Sure. The interesting thing I found about hoodoo, also sometimes they call it conjure, is that it is a very flexible system, so that there isn't always a straight 100% set way of doing the practices. It's more of a conceptual vehicle for people who want to do a magic and magic related to healing and sometimes not so nice things as well. So the most important thing of all the systems of hoodoo and the practitioner I've talked to is that there's a big belief on interaction of the root doctor or the hoodoo person with the spiritual world. But it's very important that the practitioner has a very strong sense of his or her intention of what they want to create. So they believe they can interact with the spirit world, but if they're going to create a spell, they're going to, what they call charging up a root or charging up a charm. In the voodoo tradition, you hear a lot more about the mojo. It's all the same kind of thing. The practitioner has to be very clear and put a great deal of his or her intention into what the outcome is. So they believe that their thoughts, their emotions are this powerful vehicle to actually create change in the physical world. So they can have all kinds of different spells that can be similar, but at the core, it's that belief that they can interact with the spirits of nature and the natural world with their intention and create change in that natural world.
Paul, what's an example of a hoodoo spell, a common one?
Okay. The more common ones I hear about are obviously things about, the two things that most of us spend our time focusing on are love and money, but it can be all kinds of different things that a person may want to have more or less of in their life. So in the case of, let's say, love, there's an old spell that I read from Charleston, South Carolina, root doctors in Charleston were doing, is that the person who you want to attract their attention, if there's any way that you can secure a little bit of their hair or something like that, you're supposed to take that hair and wrap it around a certain, either a root or even a certain piece of meat, some kind of something that's supposed to have some power, and put it into a small bag and wear it up underneath your armpit on your left side because it's closer to your heart. And you're supposed to wear that for a certain amount of time and be sending a lot of intention about getting that person's affection. So that would be a simple spell that the person could even do themselves, although they would probably go to a root doctor or a hoodoo person because of their magical power, so that when they do take the mojo or the root and use it, it will be charged at a much higher level of intensity.
So is the practitioner doing this to benefit themselves or to benefit a third party, or both?
Yeah, it could be both. If the practitioner is someone who people come to for help, it's certainly another party, but also for themselves. If you are in direct contact with the spirit world, then the thought is that you can directly cause change in your own life as well. So you're doing spells yourself. Maybe you go out to have your card game tonight. Maybe you want to increase your odds, so you would maybe do a spell before you go out to hopefully push the odds in your favor.
Now, I would imagine that acquiring someone's hair, that can be somewhat controversial in a way.
Yeah, it is. As a matter of fact, I'd heard someone had told me that in a lot of the barbershops a few years ago, particularly African-American barbershops, some people would be would basically want their hair. So would have the barber sweep up their hair.
Really?
And the thing is that if the hair, somebody could use that against them. So if, we've heard about the voodoo with the V dolls, where the likeness of the person. Well, hoodoo has those kind of things too. And so you would take the hair of the person that you'd want to malign or, hurt, or, maybe even to help or to love, and you'd put that hair or whatever the personal object is with that doll or any other kind of object that represents that person. Called Western occult, they call it symbolic magic. It's creating the symbol that then the symbol will become reality. So, they'd get really nervous about, some folks would be, about the hair and, fingernail clippings. Some spells involve trying to get any type of bodily fluids, to use in spells. So it can get pretty intense.
Yeah. So the creation of dolls is something that does happen in hoodoo.
Yeah, it does. It's not the primary thing, but no, you can. I've heard on many occasions out on St. Helena Island off the coast of Beaufort, South Carolina, where hoodoo was for many years pretty big. There are quite a few dolls and things like that. But again, it doesn't have to strictly be the traditional looking doll. It can even be a wax figure. It can be whatever it is that's representing that person. So it's almost like the unconscious mind kind of takes that in as the person and accepts it as the individual.
I'm not sure if there's a way to quantify this, but I'll ask you anyway. In looking at the creation of a doll,
mm-hmm.
How often, I don't know if you can put a percentage on it or not, but how often is the practitioner looking to do harm to someone as opposed to doing something that is helpful or an aid of some kind?
Yeah, you're correct. It's hard to quantify that. What usually gets the press in the media, like in movies and TV and things like that, are generally the dark stuff, like listeners may have seen the movie Skeleton Key or one of those. It's always this dark, menacing kind of aspect. But I've found that if it at worst 50-50. At best, it's like 70-30, with the 70 being the more positive aspects of hoodoo. Hoodoo is a way to protect oneself because, I mean, there's all kinds of different acts you can do. There's punitive acts, there's curative acts, there's warding off evil spirits, good fortune acts, diagnosing illness acts, all these kind of different things that are involved in hoodoo, but yet it does draw our attention to the negative, the curses.
You mentioned a movie that I like very much, The Skeleton Key, which is a movie with Kate Hudson. I believe Jenna Rollins is in it as well. I really liked it, but is it accurate?
Well, a lot of it, the real, parts of it, I think, have a basis in truth with some of the what I'm looking for, some of the designs, so what we call in ritual magic, the sigils and different kinds of things, and putting the circle with the salt, for protection. There's some truth in that as far as the practices go, but and certainly, the real far out stuff that you see in the movies, obviously, wonderful acting and screenwriting.
Sure. What about the use of candles? That seems to be very prominent in hoodoo. What is the role of candles?
Yeah, candles it is very prominent in hoodoo. Candles are used as, again, a symbol of something. And there's a certain color of candle that is supposed to represent something. So when you're bringing a candle into your home, and particularly if it's a candle that has been blessed or charged up by a practitioner or even yourself, that candle and that color of the candle stands for certain things. So, for example, an obvious color of red corresponds with love or sexuality or something like that. So if you're looking for Mr. or Ms. Right and you're focusing your intention on that, you may want to have red candles when you're doing your intention setting or meditations or whatever, and light those and make that a part of your ritual. Whereas for income, green money. So if you have green candles, it's a thing that you want to have around you if you're trying to increase your wealth. Black candle, not so good. That's usually attributed to negative acts. If you're wanting someone harm or death or those kind of things. But it is definitely a big part of the tradition. So much I made sure I had a picture of some candles on the cover of my book because it is one of those things that most all the practitioners generally use.
The practitioners, are they usually by themselves or with someone who has come to them for assistance, or do they ever have a group get-together? Not necessarily a mass, but some sort of a situation where a number of practitioners come together. How does that dynamic work?
The group can happen, but a lot of times it'll be more in a religious setting, like some of the sanctified churches, and it won't be strictly a hoodoo get-together. Most of the individuals I met were solitary practitioners. They knew other practitioners, but they tended to work by themselves. And even if they weren't working, like getting paid for their hoodoo work, they would do it more privately for family, that kind of thing. And then if word got out, sometimes people would just show up at the door and just ask for help. But there was not a lot of, like you hear in some magical systems of the Golden Dawn and Wicca and all this, really a focus on group work. I found hoodoo to be a lot less of that.
Interesting. We will continue with our guest, Dr. Paul Leslie, offering his insights on the subject of hoodoo. We'll also be getting into the subject of shamanism as well. Want to mention Paul's books. His most recent is called Country Shamanism, an exploration of the magical and healing practices of the coastal Carolinas and Georgia. He has also written The Year of Living Magically, Practical Ways to Create a Life of Spirit, Wonder, and Connection. Paul, before the break, I noted two of the books that you had written in this particular area, shamanism, hoodoo, but you've written several other books in other areas, and I was just noticing one of the books, Get Out of Your Seat, An Average Passenger's Guide to Overcoming Airline Terror. This is probably a book I need to read. I have a terrible phobia about flying. This sounds like it would be right up my alley.
Don't know if that would be the book for you. It might help a little bit, but it's actually co-written with a guy who trained flight crews in dealing with terrorism. So it's like I do the psychology part, and he does the counterterrorism part. So
okay. I thought it was like somebody having terror thoughts going through their mind as like the takeoff. You're talking about terrorism.
You're right. Exactly.
I see.
Although there are some exercises to help a little bit with anxiety and that, but it's really geared toward folks, who hopefully won't have to deal with those kind of issues. We wrote it right after 9/11, and so it's a real short book, but some people gotten some benefit out of it. But I hear you about the flying. It's taken me a long time to get to where I'm comfortable on a plane as well. Yeah.
Most of my fears come out of irrational thoughts. And that's something I guess we'll have to deal with at another time. We do have our top of the hour break coming up, but we are going to continue another full hour to go with Dr. Paul Leslie. He will stay with us on the phone line. We will take your calls for Dr. Leslie next hour. If you want to write down our toll-free number, it's 844-687-7669, talking about hoodoo, how it's different from voodoo. We'll be talking about shamanism, getting into some other areas of conversation. Paul, I'm curious about the first time that you met with a practitioner of hoodoo. What was that like?
I had geared myself up in my mind. It was going to go a certain way, and it turned out to be just the opposite. I had already pictured how somebody would look, how they would talk, how, somebody maybe really mysterious, maybe slightly dark and devious. And the first real practitioner that I was able to speak to at length was this wonderful lady named Angel Hakeem, who was from Savannah. And she's just the most wonderful, open person, and we still maintain a very good friendship to this day. And she's a grandmother and a college student, just as normal on the outside as can be, and just happens to be that she's someone who is a hoodoo practitioner, a root worker. You could say it multiple ways, but she connects with the. At least she believes she connects with the spirit realm and helps people in all kinds of different ways. So in a way, it was very pleasant.
Yeah.
It was a little bit of a letdown because, I'd already geared myself up to think, I'm going to meet this really far out kind of person. But in a way, it was refreshing that, somebody who's cultured and so kind, was also trying to, continue a tradition.
So you went in thinking you're going to be intimidated, you're a little nervous, and then you found out, well, this person's really got a soft touch.
Oh, yeah. Within a minute of talk, even before I met her face-to-face, then talking to her on the phone, I could just sense there was something really great about her. And I've just found out that she is completing her doctorate in counseling. So she is going to be, in addition to being a root doctor and a spiritual analyst, if you will, she's going to be a psychological analyst and counselor. So she's going to be doing both worlds there, which will be interesting.
So it sounds like she's on the younger side. Do there tend to be a great variance in the ages of these practitioners?
Yeah, I found that most of the ones I talked to were generally over 40.
Okay.
But there are some younger people. I actually asked one of my contacts about that, and she was like thinking that it's just a generation thing. It's kind of like all the that hoodoo stuff that's old, that's out. They're not that interested in it, and I think a lot of times it's because it's been marginalized and ridiculed. But it's also maybe they don't understand that, and maybe it takes wisdom with living in age to appreciate it.
Yeah. We continue with Dr. Paul Leslie. We will take your calls, 844-687-7669. Let's go to our first caller. We have Dee, who is a regular on the show. Dee joins us from Florida. Dee, welcome to Beyond Reality Radio, and you're on with Dr. Paul Leslie.
Hi, gentlemen. It's nice to talk with both of you.
Yes.
It has been me working up courage to call in. I come from a strong, Christian upbringing, and I was telling Ryan, who answered the phone, my grandparents would be flipping in their graves knowing that I was calling in. But listening to, the show earlier, The Skeleton Key, the movie that you had mentioned earlier, that show and some of the others, not like the Freddy Krueger type movies, have always really kind of piqued my interest. And they were some of the things, like with the hoodoo type, the salt across the thresholds and different things like that. I've had a couple of very strange experiences that have made my interest about the hereafter. I'm not a psychic or being able to connect with the hereafter, but when my brother passed away, I was going through a very hard time, but my brother's voice did come through to me, and he did not use my name, but he called me by my nickname, and it was his voice, and it was like it came through like a wind, and that is what startled me. And me and my friends, when we all got together, we always sat out in the garage and visited, and I poured salt across the threshold of the garage door because it freaked me out, and I was not used to that. How much of this type of thing, I didn't feel scared by it, but I was just so thrown off by it because that type of thing has never hit me before. And possibly, maybe I was just in such a vulnerable state. Dr. Leslie, that's why I wanted to ask you about this type of thing.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's not uncommon for that to happen. I was just actually reading some research that, and I'm going to call this an auditory hallucination, not to say that didn't happen, but just that's what they called it, that people who have grief will have those kind of auditory sensations fairly common. And the article went on to talk about that there's a large percentage of the population who are not suffering from any type of mental illness that hear things, and they refer to them as I said, auditory hallucinations. Whether they're, legit or not, I think is up to the individual to determine. So it is not uncommon, and I don't think it automatically assumes anything is evil or destructive. I just think it's one of those things that people are not very comfortable talking about. I think in a perfect world, if we all talked about the weird stuff that happens to us, we could normalize a lot of it.
But I wasn't still in the grieving state. This was 2 years after my brother had passed.
Okay.
So this is, I wasn't out boo-hooing or anything like this. So I was like, oh, and I felt kind of estranged or weird feeling being alone by myself. In the garage without other people being by me. So, but these type of things that people, you hear young children that have these sensations or that they felt that they are born with these type of intuitions or that they are just born into, like with the hoodoo type things and different things that you see that they know that they are born with. How do you explain if it's just hit with them? I'm not a spring chicken. I'm in my 50s. So this is what has made me feel a little weird.
Right. Well, I would just say for your own experience, I would just take that maybe as a meaningful experience, because if it's, I think you said it was your brother.
Correct.
That's a wonderful, connection that maybe you have, and maybe focusing on the meaningful, positive aspects.
Meaningful side, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you guys.
All right, Dee. Thank you very much, Dee, for the call.
Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Couple of things I want to follow up on this, Paul. Is salt used by hoodoo practitioners? Does that have any kind of significance?
It's they use it for several different things. One is that when you're wanting a protective circle around you, when you're if you're the practitioner, you're doing the work to ensure the purity of the work, to keeping the bad mojo, if you will, out. That's used often. Old days, a lot of the culture of the slaves, which down here the community was known as the Gullah, which are the descendants of the slaves who lived down on the Sea Islands. They would have salt handy and at night and pour it in their bed because they were worried of what they would call the old hag or the boo hag, which would come in. It was kind of like a energetic vampire, and it would, while you're asleep, kind of steal your energy, your soul, those kind of things. And it was salt that would keep the boo hag away. It also sometimes would cause the hag to have to count the salt, and that would delay the attack by it.
The other thing, as a follow-up to what Dee said, do hoodoo practitioners have typically the ability to communicate with the deceased? Is that part of what they do?
Most of them don't advertise that. Some of them do. The lady I was speaking about earlier, Angel Hakim, she is also labels herself a medium, and she says it's in that culture. Talking to the deceased, it's kind of tricky sometimes. You honor the ancestors. That's from Africa, the tradition of honoring the ancestors. But direct communication and mediumship, you don't find a lot of publicly. Generally, I'm overgeneralizing here, but in the African American communities, I mean, if you just do a search in Google for psychic mediums, most you'll find are Caucasians, and mostly women, but some men. So there may be this taboo on those who do that kind of thing or believe they do that kind of thing, not talking about it as much.
Let's go back to the phones. We have Jasmine joining us on the line from Boston, Massachusetts. Jasmine, you're on Beyond Reality Radio with Dr. Paul Leslie.
Hi, Dr. Leslie, and I'm sorry, I don't know who's hosting tonight. I notice you're not JV.
Yeah, Jason and JV have the night off. My name is Bruce Markusen, so I'm the guest host. But let Let Dr. Leslie be the focus.
Okay. My question is for shamanism part. I know you haven't gotten to it yet, but I know there is various types of shamanism, and I was kind of curious to know about soul retrieval and soul loss. I understand when people go through a lot of trauma, it kind of negatively impacts the soul, like either the soul, you lose part of your soul, or the soul becomes fragmented. And I was wondering if you do, like, soul retrievals.
You're talking about me personally?
Yeah, or you know of any shamanic practitioners that do it.
Well, certainly. I mean, I don't really do that work, but I do know of some people who engage in that. You find that term used a lot with shamanism. I find with a lot of Native American, Central and South American shamanic traditions, and although there's Norse traditions who also have something similar. Most shamanistic systems are actually very similar in the things they do. It's more of the social context, the culture that dictates certain terminologies, and the terrain may dictate what is used in ceremonies. But the soul retrieval, and I've heard for some folks who've been through trauma. Find that can be very beneficial to they've lost a part of themselves due to trauma, and the shaman will then go and retrieve that part.
Jasmine, thank you very much for the call. Jasmine brought up the subject of shamanism. We have only about 30 seconds before the break, but in a nutshell, Paul, what exactly is shamanism?
Real quick, basically shamanism is a system that changes depending on a culture in which an individual is kind of in a community put in place to interact with the spirit world to help the community grow and heal.
We'll continue for about another 25 minutes with our guest, Dr. Paul Leslie, psychotherapist, author, and educator, talking about hoodoo and shamanism. Paul, as our last caller brought up the subject of shamanism, let's try to get into some more depth on that. And I've heard it said that shamanism is a practice that involves a practitioner reaching altered states of consciousness. What exactly do we mean by that? Do we mean that they become another person? They invoke a spirit of someone who's deceased? How do you explain that?
Well, when you say altered states of consciousness, there's multiple states of consciousness, and for shamans in particular, the criteria that was laid down by the guy who coined the term shamanism was a researcher, scholar named Eliade, who was from, I think, University of Chicago. He talked about these altered states were ways in which that they would interact with the spirit world, or they would become possessed, and I mean that in a good way, by a deity. They would be able to meld with animals for the purpose of performing divination and fortune telling, and it's overall this, whatever their everyday consciousness was, they were able to shift that to open up to other realms. It's kind of like, as some researchers think, how our brain filters out so much information. They were able to, that reducing valve, they were able to open it a little bit more effectively. Some used hallucinogenic drugs, but I found that a great number of shamans didn't really do hallucinogenic drugs. They oftentimes would enter into these altered states due to ecstatic dancing, movement, ceremony, ritual, those kind of things. But anything that just kind of opens up to to the possibility of what they perceived as other realms.
Mm-hmm. Do they do this in private, or do they do this in view of other people?
In the traditional sense, it could go either way. Sometimes the shaman was a part of the community, but not a part of the community, depending on the culture. So it may be that you have the village, and then the shaman was like the hermit who lives out in the woods, and then when they need him or her, they would go get them and bring them in, because a lot of the shamans, their behavior was so erratic, and they were actually quite frightening to many of the people who they served. So they had a useful place. And a lot of accounts, it sounds like from a psychopathology perspective, you say, well, they could be diagnosed, if you take out of that context, they could be diagnosed with, schizophrenia or bipolar 1 with the mania, or those kind of things. And yet, in those cultures, they were also able to serve a useful function. Whereas in our culture, someone who may be schizophrenic, obviously, people are very uncomfortable, and you medicate them and put them in the hospital and all that, so they don't have any real purpose. So that community, I think, communal kind of way of utilizing the shaman is much different from our modern Western world.
Have you seen a shaman at work?
Yeah, I really truly believe, and in my book I even talk about this, that legitimate hoodoo practitioners fit Iliade's criteria for being shaman. As actually a village not too far from where I live, that it used to be called the Voodoo Village, and it was set up by African Americans to kind of hold on to a lot of their cultural traditions, and they have events where they have these ceremonies, and people claim to become possessed while they are doing their dances and take on certain characteristics of ancestors or certain spirit beings. So yeah, that can happen.
We will continue with our guest, Dr. Paul Leslie, talking about hoodoo and shamanism. Our phone line, toll free, is 844-687-7669. And our next caller actually comes from the geographic region where we associate with hoodoo. That's South Carolina. On the line with us is D. Hughes from Greenville, South Carolina. Welcome to Beyond Reality Radio. You're on the air with Dr. Paul Leslie.
Yes, thank you very much. I live in Greenville, but I'm originally from the Cherokee Indian Reservation in Cherokee, North Carolina.
Okay.
And I was, I don't, my relatives, I never did really hear them talk much about shamanism. It was always about, conjuring, and I still don't fully understand the difference between hoodoo and conjuring, or if there's a difference between the Cherokee type of conjuring and conjuring done among other tribes.
Yeah. I found, as far as the conjuring, the term conjure and hoodoo, those are pretty much interchangeable. Your question about, for maybe more Native American magic, and a lot of times it's called witchcraft, which has, unfortunately, a negative connotation. Again, I found in my research that there's not a lot of difference in the concepts. It's more of the cultural connotation. So, it'll be more in league with if you're doing a certain ritual spell to, Cherokee religious beliefs, or just, the land, the area they occupy, whereas maybe hoodoo would be, taking on more of the flavor of traditional African-American, mysticism.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yep. We thank you for calling. Thanks for being with us. Paul, you see a lot of commonality between shamanism and hoodoo then, right?
I do.
You see them very much linked. Let's talk a little bit about why something like hoodoo is as old as it is. It goes back obviously centuries. It goes back to African nations, was then brought to the States through the slave trade. Why all these centuries later is something like hoodoo still generating so much interest in the general public? Why is that?
I think, first of all, is it's still mysterious. And I think human nature is we all love a mystery and the mysterious. I mean, that's what this program's about. The different things that are out there that kind of intrigue us. I think a lot of it too is that whether my opinion about the effectiveness of and etiology of whether these things work or not, most of the people who actively engage in hoodoo, conjuring, or whatever, they find some benefit. And if the benefit is not that their spells work, if their benefit is that even just performing the spells, they feel better or they feel a sense of purpose or something, there is some efficacy to what they're doing. So if something is working on some level or multiple levels, it's going to continue. I think it's not as well known as other magical and shamanic systems, unfortunately, due to a lot of negative stereotypes that it was plagued with that through the past 200 years. But I think it's just as valid and valuable as a spiritual system, a magical system, as anything else that's out there.
Do you sense that there's any change coming, any turn of the corner, or are those who practice hoodoo still facing very much an uphill climb?
Well, I do feel like there's a little more openness to the hoodoo ideas and concepts. I think it's just going to take time, but there is still some resistance. As one of my contacts told me, that growing up during the Jim Crow era, it was best to be as white as possible, act as white as possible, to be, not stand out in any weird way, for your safety. And I think maybe that undercurrent is still kind of there, maybe even at the unconscious level. So hopefully in time that can disappear too, and we can see even more. At least that's what I'm hoping.
You've talked about South Carolina, Georgia kind of being the hotbeds of this activity. What about in places like Louisiana, more specifically a city like New Orleans? Is hoodoo gaining any traction into other states, other regions?
Oh, absolutely. Hoodoo's all over. As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues who's also into this stuff told me that right now he thinks the hotbed of hoodoo is now Baltimore.
Really?
Baltimore, Maryland. And he says a lot of, people have moved up into that region, and there's a lot more root workers showing up in Baltimore. So, yeah, even though a lot of the hoodoo came in, because Charleston, South Carolina is one of the main ports for bringing in slaves until that was, made illegal to bring in new slaves. And so it kind of, filtered the slaves, and then they kind of went through the Carolinas, Georgia, up north, to Virginia, and then, of course, across, Alabama, Tennessee. I mean, most anywhere you will find previous history of African-American slave trade, there's going to be some hoodoo involved. I just think some areas it's more prevalent, or I should say more available to be seen, whereas, New Orleans voodoo, they've made a cottage industry out of that, so it's kind of a lot easier to find that, whereas in a lot of other places it is still kind of hidden.
Paul, let's talk about your book, one of about 4 or 5 books that you've done. This came out 2014, Low Country Shamanism, an exploration of the magical and healing practices of the coastal Carolinas and Georgia. You're obviously a skilled writer, so tackling a book-length subject like this was something that you were comfortable with doing, but how long did it take for you to put this book together, start to finish?
Honestly, I think 6 months. And the reason I think it went so quickly is it's one of those things that once I started on it, doors opened that I didn't expect to open. I initially didn't feel I was getting anywhere, but I thought that what I was doing is I was approaching it from too much of my left brain analytical scientist mind, and I just needed to be more open to people's stories, to their experiences. And when I kind of let and just set my own beliefs and biases and just be open, it's just like this door opened, and people were interested in talking to me, and things just kind of fell into place. I was really kind of surprised how quick. I wish all my books were quite as easily written.
Yeah, 6 months is a very good turnaround time. Were there any practitioners who were just not willing to talk to you, did not want to go on the record at all?
Yeah, I would say most.
Really?
It was unfortunate too. Now, some of them talked to me. A lot of them actually would talk to me, but I was basically almost had to put my hand on the Bible and swear an oath that I wouldn't say that I talked to them or anything they told me, which I'm still honored that they talked to me anyway. But a lot of folks, it really is this kind of fear of ridicule of. I had one person I knew it was like their grandfather did it, and then the great grandfather did it, but still carrying on the tradition. But I just don't want anyone to know I'm carrying on the tradition because I work at a bank or something. I don't want people to know that I do those kind of things. Which I think it's kind of sad. That's the state of the world.
Yeah,
it is what it is.
Yeah, that stigma does persist. Paul, for those who are interested in buying the book, I assume it's still in print. What's the best way to acquire the book?
Oh, it's all the usual cast of characters: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, online. You can find it anywhere. You can find it on my website too.
And by the way, your website is drpaulleslie.com. So it's DRPAULLESLIE, not EY, but LESLIE.com, drpaulleslie.com. Visit the website, buy the book, Low Country Shamanism, an exploration of the magical and healing practices of the coastal Carolinas and Georgia. Final question, Paul. You planning any follow-up books, any follow-up projects in this area?
Anything is possible. I was actually a couple of weeks ago talking to some folks who were practitioners and very, very much encouraging me to do more. I'm not sure what that will come to fruition, but if the last one I could knock out in 6 months, who knows? I still keep up my academic writing and all, so I think I'll always have a place for those kind of topics.
Well, Paul, we very much appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us these 2 hours on Beyond Reality Radio. Thanks.
It's a real pleasure, Bruce. Thanks for having me, my friend.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Paul Leslie, he is a psychotherapist, an educator, an author. He has written 2 books on this particular subject, also written some books in other areas as well. Again, his website is drpaulleslie.com. And he has really become one of the authorities on the practice of hoodoo and also its relationship to shamanism and the strong connection. Tomorrow night will be a best of show. That's the Friday night show. We are back live, though, on Monday. I'll once again be guest hosting as Jason and JV take a little bit of time off. Our guest on the Monday night show will be Carlin Betcha. She is an artist and illustrator. And should be a lot of fun. She'll be talking about monsters, zombies, famous body parts like Van Gogh's ear and George Washington's brain, and other creepy things. And that'll be coming up on our Monday night show. And then Tuesday night, Jason and JV will return. Their guest will be Cindy Brannon, who is a witch and spiritual teacher. She'll be talking about Hecatian witchcraft. And that is the Tuesday night show coming up for Beyond Reality Radio. Of course, you can follow us at our website, beyondrealityradio.com. Follow us on Facebook at Beyond Reality Radio, also on Snapchat and Instagram. And if you'd like to follow me on Facebook, I have a page, Bruce Markusen's Ghostly Gallery. Just put the words Ghostly Gallery into the Facebook search. My page will come up. We hope you visit it and like it. Lots of stuff about horror, supernatural, the paranormal, stuff about this program. Let's see, earlier tonight I had a posting. Every Thursday night I do a posting about a memorable horror film poster. And tonight I did one on the 1980 cult classic Motel Hell. Kind of a fun movie. It's horror, but it's also comedy. It's done very much tongue-in-cheek. It's kind of a parody of films like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Starred the late Rory Calhoun, who was at one time a leading man, but by this part in his career was a little bit toward the end and was taking roles in films called Motel Hell. So visit my Ghostly Gallery. We hope you visit and like it as well. We thank you for joining us tonight on Beyond Reality Radio. Have a good night, everybody.
Beyond Reality Radio is hosted by Jason Hawes and JV Johnson and produced by Alexandria Johnson and Slick Eddie Edwards for Entercom Radio. Beyond Reality Radio is distributed by Westwood One Radio Networks. Stop by our Facebook page and say hello. Follow the hosts on Facebook as well. For Jason Hawes, follow at jasonhawes.taps. For JV Johnson, follow at JVJ Paranormal. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Radio or you have a suggestion for a guest, contact Slick Eddie Edwards at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com. Be sure to visit our chat room as well at beyondrealityradio.com. Thanks for listening.